Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And I want to thank one of my loyal subscribers for awareing me that Cali Muscle gave us a piece of comedy gold. And I don't know, I'll either fit it in this video or I'll link it down below because it's kind of hard to dig through his long videos. But it's about 11 minutes into one of his recent live streams where Cali, the Booty Warrior Muscle, basically said that pause reps don't give you any gains. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. We're going to scale up my crafting a little bit and let's talk about this. You guys know how Cali is. Listen up, young blood. For 20 years, this is how I did it. I come down and go, pause. Boom, lock it out. Come down, pause. Boom, lock it out. I did that for 20 years and didn't make any gains until I saw Ronnie Coleman doing a constant tension, and I started doing that, and that's when I got big. You guys ever notice when Cali Muscle tells stories about at different points how he got big, you notice like his timeline and story changes every single time? I mean, did anyone catch that? Because if you guys recall, what did he used to say when he was in prison? When he was in prison, and guys offered him Dianabol. You guys remember the story. And I said, what's Debo? And he said, it'll get you big. And I said, I'm already big, player. Ha ha. You know, that's what he did, right? He jumped up and said all that. But it's like, okay, so how are these timelines working out? I mean, were you in prison 3 years ago? Because, you know, he's been on YouTube, what, 7 or 8 years now? He's in his 40s. So for 20 years, he did pause work and didn't get big, right? 20 years, he did pause work and didn't get big. So, I don't know, from what, about age 16 up to 36, he didn't make any gains because he was doing all this, the pause work and stopping and doing full range of motion reps, right? Well, so I guess after that, he was in prison, because he got in prison, he was already big. He said he was already big in prison. Well, he's in his, what, about 46 now, 45? Been on YouTube 7 or 8 years. Where's this time frame he was in prison then? You know, you have to wonder. It's absolutely, sorry about that, had to answer my phone. Absolutely ridiculous, because then that's the other thing. He says in this same video, what does he say? What does he say? That in prison they did it wrong too, because, you know, back in prison we used to bounce it off the chest, and it doesn't actually, you don't get a big chest doing that, you know. So it's this ridiculousness. So it's like 20 years he did pause work, didn't make any gains. Well, we know he was really big by the time he got to YouTube, but then when he was in prison, he was already big. But then in prison, they bounce it off their chest, and I agree, that does give less chest recruitment. That's just silly ass bro lifting, bouncing the bar off your chest. I believe you do need to pause. You know, he says all this stuff, and then you got to wonder, well, at what point did you get big then? Because all the time he always says, I was big 20 years ago. Well, if you were doing all this other stuff and it didn't work for 20 years and you didn't get big, you were like 150 pounds, I guess, for 20 years of lifting, and then you got big with the constant tension, but then in prison you did it wrong too. Where's the time frame where you actually trained right and got big? And the ludicrousness of it to say that the pause work doesn't give you gains, whereas in constant tension does. If you guys looked at what any of the experts actually say on this, I'm not talking about Cali Muscle, I'm not talking about people who learn stuff in prison, I'm talking about actual experts. I mean, a perfect example, you guys know, I talk about Dr. Mike Israetel sometimes. Now, before someone says, oh, he's just a lab coat, egghead, whatever. Okay. Mike is pretty jacked. He's a bodybuilder. He's competed in bodybuilding, competed in powerlifting, competes in BJJ. He's a PhD in exercise science, has been a professor of kinesiology, and he's a pretty big, pretty jacked dude. And he has said that on the topic of constant tension, there is not only no evidence that constant tension helps build muscle mass in any way. In other words, there's not one shred of scientific evidence that it actually helps build more muscle. There's no evidence. And there isn't even a biological proposed pathway in the body by which it could do so. In other words, It comes purely out of the bodybuilding world where guys are blasting grams and grams of gear, and it's just something that they started doing. And the researchers don't even see any reason to think, like, not only is there no evidence when they've looked at it that it does anything, there is no actual reason. If you just looked at the way the body works, there is no mechanism, even a hypothetical, right? Even a hypothetical mechanism in the body by which it could cause muscle growth. The reality is, you start talking about chest, start talking about your chest, how do you get more muscle activation off the chest on a bench? By pausing, right? Because if you pause and you hold that stretch for a second and then you have to explode, your pectorals have to fire harder to get the weight moving. You know, so he's talking about constant tension, but then he kind of throws in the whole bouncing it off your chest. Well, that's the exact opposite of pause work, right? I mean, that's the three extremes. Pausing would be one whole extreme. Constant tension would be another, and then bouncing off your chest would be another. Which one's going to give you the most pectoral recruitment, the highest amount of rate coding happening? Maybe that's not the right term. The highest number of motor units being activated. The pause. And then just a light touch where you're in constant tension is number two, and then bouncing it off your chest is going to give you the least out of that. All right, it's going to give you the least out of that because you're just using complete outside inertia to just bounce it like a spring off your chest, but your pecs are doing less work. Granted, you can lift more weight, a lot more weight bouncing, so maybe it will balance out the total recovery, not the recovery, but the actual work done, because you'll still reach failure with a given amount of work being done. But the truth is, he's just talking nonsense. And there are tons of guys out there who have gotten jacked doing pause work. There are guys with massive chests and triceps who do heavy ass pause benching. So without even getting into the science, you want to talk about anecdote. His anecdotes always come back to this professional bodybuilder does this, so therefore it must work. But this professional bodybuilder might have a $20,000 a year drug bill and is very genetically gifted. It's like a lot of other people say. There have been experts out there and coaches who said professional bodybuilders, because of their genetics and their drugs, most of them could stand around doing nothing but jumping jacks or burpees all day and not even touch a weight and still be more jacked than 99% of people at your gym right now. And that's always this works because this is what pro bodybuilders do. No, man, what pro bodybuilders do that work is pick their parents carefully, blast insane amounts of drugs, and then they site enhance whatever muscle's lagging and they need to bring up further by injecting stuff directly into that muscle. All right, that is not your basis for reality on how the human body works as far as getting gains for people who are natural, people who are modest users, or people who have average genetics. What these pro bodybuilders do is not going to work for them. And this whole nonsense that constant tension is somehow superior, absolute BS. I'll say the two things that give you the best results for actually recruiting muscle fibers is going to be either something where you can initiate a stretch reflex, a myotatic reflex, or dead stop training with a pause. All right, that is what's going to give you the best possibilities of maximizing muscle fiber recruitment. And by recruiting and fatiguing muscle fibers, that's how we grow. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.
Okay, here we go. So I turned it down a little bit. So here we go. So dumbbells. Here go. This is what everybody in the gym doing. This is what you taught at the gym. Boom, pause, boom, 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 boom. And you wonder why you ain't getting big. I did that for 20 years until I seen a Ronnie Coleman video, and then he was pumping. And I'm like, damn, it gotta be something to that, because he the biggest motherfucker I ever seen. And so once I started constant tension, and it was harder to do that because most people come down their chest, boom, bounce it. And when I was in prison, we bounced it a lot, boom, off our chest. And so it was easy. But when you come down and stop it with constant tension pumping, you working that muscle to the fullest. So for those that didn't know, the chest, you have incline. This is pectoral minor, pectoral major. So when your muscle, and I like working pectoral minor the most because everybody's slacking that upper. See that upper with all them cuts and veins in it? That's what everybody's slacking. So for years, I only did all incline press. I didn't do no flat bench for years.